Watering is the single most important thing that you can do for your plants. Get it wrong and your plants are destined for only one place, the bin. This video will tell you all the best ways you should water your plants, as well as some ways that you shouldn't, as well as going over how you should exactly water some species of plants, such as succulents, monstera and orchids. So there's a lot to get into, so let's get to it. By the way, this video is sponsored by Squarespace, but more in them in a jiffy. So the first thing that you should absolutely always do before watering any of your plants is to check that it needs water first. So that means checking that the soil is dry. If the soil is wet, then you don't want to add more water because then you get into overwatering problems and root rot issues, and we definitely don't want that. So you can use your trusty finger and stick it about halfway into the soil if you can, if there's roots not in the way, and then feel for moisture. If it feels wet, and leave it a few days and then check again. But I like to use, as if you're a subscriber to the channel, you'll know this, I like to use the world's best invention, the humble moisture meter. So I like to stick it into the soil. I go more or less into the bottom half of the soil and take a reading. So that's reading dry. So if it's in the dry zone, which is 1 to 3 on the moisture meter, then it is ready for a top up, which this spider plant here is. So the way that probably the majority of us like to water our plants is to just grab your watering can and then just run water over the soil of the plant. And we do this, of course, because it's the simplest way and it's the quickest way. If you've got a lot of plants in your house, it's just going to be nice and easy just to go through your plants and water over the top. But to be honest, this isn't really the method that I choose for a few reasons, and one of them is uneven watering. So when you pour water over the top of the soil, obviously you don't want to add too much because you don't want to overwater the plant, so you might be a little bit thrifty with it, and then that means that the soil is going to get uneven watering. There's likely going to be dry patches in the soil where the roots are, so that's going to be bad for the roots. And that's because water just tends to trickle through the soil, the gaps in the soil, to the bottom, and that means that certain patches in the soil are going to get hydrated. This is especially true if you're watering big plants, like my Ficus elastica teneki here. So there's quite a big volume of soil in this pot. So if you're just to go in and just water over the top, like so, it may look like you're giving it a lot of water, but chances are it's going to trickle through the gaps and crevices in the soil, going to go to the bottom, and there's going to be areas, especially at the top, that are going to remain dry, which is not good for the health. When we water any of our plants, then we need to do so thoroughly, and that means pouring a substantial amount of water over the root ball of the plant to make sure that all the roots are getting their drink. And that presents another risk of watering in this way, because the plant is sat in its plastic pot inside its decorative pot, and that means that there's nowhere for excess water to escape. And if you're not in the habit of coming back later, maybe the next day, and discarding the excess that is there, then the plant is going to be sat in a puddle of water. It doesn't like that. It doesn't like to get wrinkly toes. So it's going to be seriously detrimental. We're going to start going into problems like overwatering and root rot from it sitting in a puddle of water all the time. The solution to that then is to take your plant, get it out of its decorative pot, and take it over to the sink and just pour water over the sink. So this allows the water to freely drain out of the drainage holes, and it's not going to get trapped by the decorative pot, and it's not going to sit in a puddle of water. The only issue with this, of course, is that it does waste water. So if you live in an area where water conservation is a big deal, then this probably isn't the option for you. A problem we often face with our plants is when the soil becomes hydrophobic. So hydrophobic just means that the soil has become so dry that it's starting to repel water. So it can be quite a challenge to get that soil hydrated again. It can take a lot of water. And this tends to happen with succulents, cacti and jade plants, because those plants, they have thick trunks and thick leaves which store water. So that means that we're not watering the soil as often as our other plants, because they can handle not having wet soil because of the water that they're storing in their leaves and trunk. So this means that the soil and the root ball can start to become quite dense. I'm sure you would have noticed that with your plants at home, and quite hydrophobic, and become quite a challenge to hydrate it. If you were to pour water over the soil of this plant, it'd take quite a lot of water to hydrate all the roots in here. But there is a hack that you can do to get around this problem. So the hack is dead simple. It's to fill a sink full of water, or you can use a bucket as well. And I've added some houseplant focus to the mix just to make sure that the plant is getting its nutrients as well. And it's simply to just submerge the entire root ball into the water. So it's doing lots of blow-offs, as you can see, and that's good. That means that the air is getting displaced in the middle of the root ball and all the water is rushing in. So I like to leave it in the sink for maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes to make sure that all the air has been displaced and the whole root ball has got fully saturated. If you're a subscriber to the channel, then you'll know that I do absolutely love bottom watering. I know I do show both in my videos, but I like to cover both bases, so I do both. So bottom watering is dead simple really. All you need to do is lift the pot out and add about 1/3 of the volume of the pot of water to the pot, like so. And then sit the plant back down. And that way the water will now slowly wick up through the soil and hydrate all the roots evenly. There'll be much less dry patches in this method. That's why I love it so much. And also it saves water as well. You're not adding so much water to the pot as you would with when you're watering over the sink. You're just adding a certain amount to the bottom of the pot and it's using it, so it's much more efficient. The great thing about bottom watering your plants, like this spider plant I've got here, is that the bottom is going to be wetter than the top. The top inch or so is going to remain much drier than the bottom. Obviously, because you're giving water to the bottom, it's going to wick up, and as it goes higher and higher, it's just going to remain dry at the top. And that is not bad for the plant's health. You might think that having the top couple of inches dry would be detrimental to the plant's health, but that's not necessarily the case. The majority of the roots are going to be at the bottom of the pot, and also having moisture at the bottom is going to encourage the roots to grow downwards, which is great. We don't want the roots near the top of the crown of the plant circling and choking it out. But also, another great thing about bottom watering and the top remaining dry is that it's less hospitable for fungus gnats. So they're going to be much less interested in flying into the dry soil of your plant and laying their eggs, which is no bad thing. Now, I know you're probably wondering, well, what happens if I give the plant too much water, if I'm overzealous? Well, the solution to that is pretty simple. I like to go back the next day, just pick up my pots and just check if there's any excess water, and if there is, I empty it over the sink, nice and simple. So I'm going to bottom water a bunch of my plants, but while I'm doing that, let's just have a chat about today's video sponsor, Squarespace. If you're looking to build a beautiful website, start an online store, or even create a portfolio to showcase your work, then Squarespace has you covered. With their easy to use templates and all-in-one platform, you can create a stunning website in minutes like I did. And the beauty is there's absolutely no coding required. Plus, they offer powerful analytics and marketing tools to help you grow your online presence. And they've even got AI to help you create your website. So head to squarespace.com to start your free trial today. And when you're ready to launch, use code Sheffield for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Self-watering pots are a great option, but to be honest, I don't have any. I prefer just watering my plants naturally, apart from these Terracotta Spikes that I've got sat in this Ficus elastica rubber plant. So this is a strange looking device, but it's similar to Oyas in the garden, if you come across that, ancient watering technique. So this is a Terracotta Spike, which is porous, which is important. So all you need to do is grab your last night's wine bottle, fill it with nutrient-rich water, and then just append it into the Terracotta Spike like so, and then pop that into the soil of your plants. So what's going to happen now is, because the terracotta is porous, it's going to slowly, very slowly seep out into the soil, and it's going to water it very gently. So this is super useful if you're going away, or if you have a couple of larger plants like this Ficus elastica. I've also got it with my Monstera upstairs. They just want to slowly trickle with water over time. Something that we often get advised in books and on the internet and videos is to go through and mist our plants 2 or 3 times a day. So why are we doing this? So essentially, the majority of our plants that we have in our homes come from tropical regions where it's nice and warm and humid. and they get plucked from their homes and told to live with us in our drier homes. So they tend to maybe suffer a little bit, especially in winter with the heating on. So we've become a little bit obsessed with humidity in the plant community. So we go through and just mist around our plants to mimic their humid environment. But I don't tend to mist my plants, even though I am doing it now. But I don't tend to do it as a general rule for a couple of reasons. One, because I don't want water to be sprayed all over my nice pictures and furniture and walls and creating a mold problem on my walls or anything like that when you start spraying like that. Another reason is because it doesn't really do much to increase the humidity around your plant, at least long term anyway. Because you mist the plant like so, there's obviously vapor in the air, but that soon dries after, a few seconds, 20 seconds or so. And you're just left with a plant with damp water on the leaves, which eventually dries anyway. So unless you've got a dedicated mister on the plant that's running 24/7, not really doing much to increase the humidity around the plant. And then also, I find that if you have leaves constantly wet in your home, because you're misting 2 or 3 times a day, or maybe even more, then this has a potential to introduce fungal and bacterial issues on your plant from the plant staying wet. And because we're not outside, there's not as many air changes inside, so that's when fold and bacterial issues become a problem. By the way, if you are often seeing problems with your plants like yellowing or leaf drop or wilting, and you're not really sure why or what to do about it, then do make sure you download my free Plant Problems Troubleshooting Handbook that you can get with the link in the description. It goes over all the common problems, why they happen, and then most importantly, what to do about it. And it's all in an easily digestible format and it's completely free, so check it out. Now I know that plastic pots with drainage holes can be a bit ugly, can't they? And sometimes we want a plant just to live in a decorative pot only, just for aesthetic reasons. And that can work as long as you're extra careful with the watering. The worst thing you can do is water your plant when it's already got water in there. So I've got my Peperomia obtusifolia variegated, and I've had this for a couple of years straight into a decorative pot. There's no pot with drainage holes. And that proves that a plant can live quite happily in a pot with no drainage. And the secret to my success is, of course, to always check the soil before watering. So I use my trusty moisture meter, and that is reading dry on the meter. So what I like to do now is to find my watering can. This needs to top up with water and just pour in. I like to aim for roughly about 1/3 of the volume of the pot, just to moisten the soil. And that way I know it's got a good drink, and I won't do so again until it's reading dry on the moisture meter. I've got a selection of my orchids here with me, and watering orchids does tend to be something that flummoxes lots of people, and it needn't really, because it is quite simple once you get into the rhythm of it. So the main issue seems to be knowing when to water your orchid, basically. And there's 3 things you need to look out for generally. You need to look at the bark. So the orchids tend to live in bark because they're a type of epiphyte, so you don't put them in soil basically. Bark or moss they tend to live in. So you just want to get your finger in there and feel how moist the bark is. So this is feeling quite dry. You can also tell really by the roots. If they're starting to go a bit crispy, then you maybe waited a bit too long to water your orchids. And then also what I like to do, my favourite way of telling, is just to feel the leaves. So these leaves feel actually quite firm and I don't need a water, so I might not water that one, but these ones, particularly this one actually, the leaves are starting to go a little bit droopy, aren't they? And they're starting to feel a little bit soft to the touch. And the roots are just starting to go a little bit crispy. So this is ready for a water. So I tend to water my orchids maybe once every week and a half, something like that. And I do it over the sink because I don't want to do it into a pot that lives in a decorative pot, because you don't want the roots to sit in water. It's going to be detrimental to the health. So I take my orchid over to my sink and I thoroughly wet all the bark. And I try to wet some of the roots that are drying as well. So I go around, getting all the nooks and crannies. Now I'm not too concerned about if I wet the leaves or not. It does tend to dry out quite quickly, But if they are really wet, then you can get a paper towel like so and just go in and just mop up the excess water. I'm upstairs now with my cacti and succulents in my bedroom. This is my brightest spot in the house. This is a west facing position, so it doesn't have any trees or hedges blocking the light like it does in my west facing living room, for example. So most people know that they don't really need lots of water, do they? Because they've got thick leaves and thick stems and trunks from which they hold lots of water. So if we were to keep the soil moist and the roots moist at all times, then the leaves are going to go mushy and you probably end up killing your plants. But that tends to mean, to be honest, that most people tend to underwater their cacti and succulents because they might not water it for 2 or 3 months, something like that, something as drastic as that. And they might go through and just give it a little tickle of water like so, thinking that that's going to be enough because they don't need much water, but they really do need much more than that. So you want to give your cactus and succulent a very good drink, and the solution to that is, if you can get it out of the pot without stabbing yourself, which it doesn't look like I'll be able to. See if I can get a stick in there to prise this out. There we go. So I like to take my cactus and succulents over to my sink area and to thoroughly drench the soil like so. So a lot of water will run off the side because the soil is quite dry. So I just want to make sure that all areas of the roots and the soil are getting a good drink. You're probably really worried about overwatering your cacti and succulent by giving it too much water. So I'm absolutely drowning this jade plant here. But to be honest, overwatering isn't about quantity of water that you give it, it's about frequency. So you can dump on a load of water on your plants, but basically you just don't want to do so again until it's completely dried out. So you want to wait until the plant is fully dried out of the soil, give it lots of water to make sure that all areas of the root ball are nice and moist and all the roots have got a good drink, and then don't do so again until it's fully dried out. That's really important with cacti and succulents. Now, to avoid all that wasted water and to also give the cactus an even drink, I like to bottom water them most of the time. So like I say, this guy, I'll pull out the plant and add about 1/3 of the volume of the pot of water, like so. Sit the cactus back down. Whoops, maybe I added a bit too much there. But the soil will now wick up all the water that it needs, and I'll come back the next morning, tomorrow morning, and discard any excess, and I know it's got a good drink and all the root ball has been evenly watered. So, what is in my watering can that I water all my plants with? Well, firstly, I don't tend to make up a small watering can like that. I fill up my big 6-litre watering can with the mixture that I make, and then I transfer some into that and then go around my plants and water. So what am I adding? Basically, I'm adding Houseplant Focus, which is by Growth Technology. So that's just a classic organic fertilizer with bits of seaweed, I think, seaweed extract. So that's just the one that I use, nothing particularly special. Don't sweat it too much. As long as you're using some fertilizer, it should be okay, and it's suitable for houseplants. So I use a cap full of that for a 6-litre watering can. That seems to be just right for my plants. I don't run into any over fertilizing issues because I always add this to every single watering can that I make up, so I'm not having to remember what I last fed when. And then to that I add some API Stressco, which is a water conditioner. I don't know why I use Stressco. You can use just water conditioner. I think I was worried about pH or something. But this neutralizes chlorine and it stops all the yellowing and browning of sensitive plants like calophyres and spider plants. So I recommend using a couple of drops of this. So a little goes a long way with this stuff. So I put it into this pipette that I nicked from Mrs. Sheffield, and that just allows me, because you only need a few drops. So I fill water conditioner and I put in, I don't know, 6-8 drops, something like that. You can't over medicate with water conditioner. You can't give it too much basically. And then I fill it with water like so. And then I go through, top up my 1-litre watering can and go around and water all my plants. Simple. So, watering aroids. So aroids is the group of plants in your homes that are probably most popular. like Philodendron, Monstera, Pothos and Alocasia, plants like that, all the fancy ones. So the big risk with aloes is overwatering because they hate having wet feet, they really do. So I've got my Philodendron Florida Beauty here, which is a fairly new addition for me. And the first thing I did when I got it was to pop it into Cybotanica's Aloe Mix, which you can get, there's a link to in the description, 10% discount that you can get off all their soil. So this has bits of coconut husk, perlite, as well as coconut core. And that just means that there's lots of air pockets in the soil for water to flow freely through. So it doesn't waterlog the soil and the roots, so they get to breathe and overall much healthier. So they don't like to be overwatered, but they still like to be watered. So it goes back to the frequency versus quantity argument. So basically you want to make sure that the soil is nice and dry before you water, and then just go in and give it a proper top up of water like so, with my Philodendron Florida Beauty there. And I've also got my new Monstera Albo, which is doing very well since I've got it. It did have root rot issues when I bought it, but it's doing much better now. So giving it a thorough drink. And then also my Philodendron Whippleway. I'm seriously debating whether I enjoy having my plants on moss poles, because they can be a bit of a pain in the bum, I found so anyway. If you're not familiar with moss poles, then basically they're just cages filled with moss that we plonk up against the rear of our plants, for which the plant can then attach its area roots and grow into the moss, and it can start to climb up. So basically mimic how they grow in the jungle, basically climbing up surrounding trees to reach the canopy. So for that to work though, we need to make sure that we're keeping this moss hydrated, which can be a bit of a pain in the bum. But you do have some options, one of which is probably my favourite, because it's quite fun, especially in summer, is to take the plant outside and just grab your hose and spray the whole lot down, including the moss and the leaves and everything. And the great thing about that is not only are you moistening the moss in the pole as well as the soil in the pot, but you also have a chance to clean the leaves of any, maybe there's some bugs or anything lurking on the underside of the leaves, and you can go in and just spray it all down. An alternative way, which can be a bit problematic if you have a large plant like this Philodendron verrucosum, is to take it over to your sink and try and moisten the moss with your watering can like so, just going up and down and just trying to get in all the nooks and crannies, which can be a bit of a pain because it does tend to make a bit of a mess and water tends to go everywhere. So when you're doing this, as with pretty much most plants, just want to make sure that your water has got some nutrients in it. I like to use a diluted amount of houseplant focus whenever I water my plants. I'm not having to remember what I last fertilised when. Another way to water moss poles is the drip method. So you grab an empty plastic bottle like so, and you add a hole to the cap, you fill it with your nutrient rich water, and then you put it upside down into the moss pile, which I'm perched on top of a chair at the moment. So I'm going to try and get that on top of there, and it's going to slowly trickle down through the moss. That's the idea of it. So rather than trying to pour water over the top of the moss, it'll just run through really quickly. You add that bottle and it will slowly drip, drip, drip through the moss and it will hydrate it. The only problem for me is that I've got them in funny places. It's a bit of a pain in the bum trying to get to them. This year I've got into the wonderful world of carnivorous plants because I find them dead interesting how they look and how they trap their prey. So I've got my Nepenthes here, or pitcher plant. These pitchers, the insects will fly in because it's attracted to the scent of the pitcher. It'll fall in and it'll get devoured by the digestive enzymes at the bottom of each of the pitchers, and it'll provide nitrogen to the plant. Similarly, I've got a Pingicula, which has sticky leaves that the fly will fly onto and get trapped, slowly get digested for the plant. And then I have my Sarracenia, which is similar to the pitcher plant, with these traps again that the insect will go in. It will fall into the enzymes and get digested. But the trap you don't want to fall into, no pun intended, is to give them tap water, because of the impurities in tap water will kill the carnivorous plants basically. They need pure water. And for that I use deionized water. This is the best thing I can get my hands on. You can use distilled water or rainwater. So I like to bottom water my carnivorous plants essentially. So I'll take the plant out of the pot, add about 1/3 of the volume, like so, and then pop the plant back on top. So you want to keep the Sarracenia and the Pingicula, you want to keep the substrate that they're living in moist at all times. You don't want them to dry out because that'll kill off these traps and the leaves of the Pingicula. Whereas the Nepenthes, you just want to let that dry out somewhat before giving it another drink based on where it lives. This lives off, I think it's a type of epiphyte, might be wrong on that, but I think it is. So it doesn't like to have wet soil basically. So don't give your carnivorous plants tap water. So we talked about decorative pots and plastic pots with drainage holes, but what about terracotta? So you'll notice here I've got 2 lovely begonias here in terracotta pots there, and I've also got my Bothos Devil's Ivy high up on the shelf, also in terracotta. But the thing that you'll notice about these is that they're not absolutely thriving, and they tend to go a little bit droopy with some yellowing leaves, particularly this guy tends to get very droopy, and that is because I'm not watering enough. I'm not watering often enough anyway, because terracotta is porous, it's got tiny little holes in the texture of the pot, and that means that water just evaporates and the plant inside dries out super quickly, the soil dries out super quickly. So you have to be really on top of watering your plants in terracotta, and that is why I'm phasing out terracotta in my home, basically because I can't be bothered to go to my plants every 4 days to check that they need watering. So I'm phasing them out. With these guys, I might put them back into terracotta because I do like the look of terracotta, but I will make sure that I glaze the inside and the outside with a terracotta varnish, and that will stop so much water from evaporating from the plant. It will be much healthier. With all these watering techniques, the goal is to avoid root rot from overwatering, but root rot is actually different to what you probably think it is. And in this video here, I spill the beans, so make sure you watch it and I'll see you there.